up, everybody? Welcome back to Storytime with Mr. D. I want to thank you all for your positive and warm, funny comments after my last story about Australia. I have so many because for many, many years in between when I finished college and when I started teaching, I was just out living each day, soaking in the moments, taking healthy risks, and experiencing the world. And along that time frame, I got this idea that it would be really, really cool to at some point ride my bike across the United States. So one day I was sitting at the pool that I worked at the time I was in my 20s, and I was managing a swimming pool in the Boston area every summer. And there was this big pool with a bunch of kids swimming, and I shouted across the entire pool to my buddy who was a lifeguard on the other side, "Hey, do you want to ride your bike across the country with me sometime?" He looked at me, thought for a second, he goes, "Yep, I'm in." I'm like, cool. So that was kind of how it started. And with some planning and some waiting and some stuff we had to wait for, like his college graduation, we left on our bike ride 3 years later. So in 2008, we shipped our bikes out to California and San Diego. I had some friends that lived out there at the time. And then when beginning of summer rolled around, I flew out there with my buddy, and we got there, we unpacked our bikes, and we started riding home. And the goal for me was more about the goal than the experience. I wanted to ride my bike from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. In addition to that, we were literally a stone's throw from the border in Mexico. We also rode through Canada, so not only did we go all the way across, but we also went from the bottom to the top. And along the way, we experienced some really cool, crazy adventures. And one that I'll never forget was when we left San Diego. About a day into the trip, we hit the Southern California desert. And if you've never ridden your bike through the Southern California desert in late June, early July, I would not recommend ever even considering it. It's a really, really bad idea. But for 5 days in a row, it was 118 degrees, and we have all these crazy experiences from having to sleep in the desert and running out of water and all this wild stuff. But we rode through the desert of Southern California and Arizona what felt like forever. But it ended up being about 3 weeks by the time we got up into Utah. And we decided that as a reward for making it through the desert and for finishing our first 1,000 miles on our bikes, we would treat ourselves to a hotel. Because up until that point, all we did was ride until we hit 100 miles on our cyclometer, because we figured if we averaged 90 miles a day, we'd be able to get across before the summer ended. And we'd shoot for 100 miles a day, so we had a little bit of buffer that we built up as the trip went on. So we're riding through the desert, and my buddy gets 9 flat tires because he had the wrong kind of tire, and his tubes kept either melting or getting pricks from some of the debris that was in the road from like the cactuses and stuff. So crazy. We figured that we learned that if we ride on the white line that's on the far right side of the road, the tire wouldn't get as hot and it wouldn't melt and it wouldn't pop. So we had to ride on this like 4-inch wide white line for as long as we could. Tractor trailers zipping past, and riding out there is just a whole different experience because, you know, grandma and grandpa would come through in their RV, they'd roll past you, and you'd think you'd have a little bit of berth, and then you'd all of a sudden attached to the back of the trailer was attached to the back of the RV was a trailer pulling a car, and then that would go past, and then you'd think you had a berth, and then attached to the car was some other trailer with like a scooter or a jet ski or a 4-wheel or something on it. It's like boom, boom, boom. It was crazy, crazy, crazy. So those first 3 weeks were treacherous, just riding through the heat, trying to manage our water, trying to manage our hydration and all that was going on. And we finally started to come out of the desert. We decided we were going to reward ourselves, I got sidetracked, with a night in a hotel. So as we're riding through what was now Utah, we got into this town and we could not find a hotel. So we ended up staying at this campground. And the lady was just closing up the campground, and we pulled in, and she was super, super nice. And she's like, "Yep, this is where the RVs park." And we're like, "Yeah, we're 2 dudes on bikes, and we pretty much have everything that we are going to be having for the next 2 months on this bike with us. And she's like, and then the tent sites are over there. And she pointed toward the tent sites. It was just this really like rocky, dry, like super uncomfortable like setup. And we're like, all right, cool, thank you. We paid her the money, and as it happened out there, nobody stayed to watch the campground at night. She just went home, I guess, and left the campground to us. So we're walking our bikes. We're walking our bikes down to this campground, this section of the campground that's literally just like dirt and like rocks and like burnt wood and like broken glass. We're like, where are we gonna set up this tent? And as we're kind of going down, right in the middle of the campground is this flagpole, and then the flagpole is surrounded by like a patch of grass, like the size of like a living room carpet, like big enough to set our tent up on, but not all that big. And we literally hadn't seen grass since we left San Diego 3 weeks before that, because once you get out in the desert, there's no grass. And I was like, there is a bright green patch of grass right there. When this lady leaves, let's set up our tent on the grass so that we can have a super soft, comfy feel underneath our tent. Our tent was a 2-person tent, but it was really just a tent for 1 person. But my buddy and I, every night for 53 days, slept in this tent. And so we're going down there, and we see her car pull out, and I was like, let's set the tent up on the grass. So we set the tent up on the grass. It's super lush, it's relaxed, like we can sit outside the tent on the grass. We haven't been on green grass in forever. It is amazing. We got to use the bathrooms and take showers. We weren't, living in the tent off the side of the road for one night. We were totally living it up. And we go to sleep on the grass. And in the middle of the night, I hear this noise. Like, what is going on? And this thing's just hitting up against our tent. I'm like, what is that? So I couldn't tell you what time it is. Middle of the night for us. And I poke my head out the tent, and as I'm poking my head out the tent, a sprinkler comes across and blasts me in the face. And I look out, and there is like 6 or 8 sprinklers completely saturating, obviously, the only place that has green grass in the entire state. And I didn't think to put 2 and 2 together. That hadn't rained in weeks through our bike ride, but yet there was this really lush piece of grass. So I step out of the tent, and it is like sprinklers everywhere. Our tent's getting blasted from every angle. I got hit in the privates by the sprinkler. I go back in, I'm shaking my buddy. I was like, yo, we gotta get out of this tent. He comes out, we're trying to pry the little the wickets that hold the tent down. It's like so dark outside. We can't find the things where you pull up. We're getting blasted with water. Our bikes are covered. The only clothes we have are covered. We get the tent. We like stumble off, carry it off, and just put it like in the little driveway of the campground, and climb back in the tent. It's soaking wet, and go back to sleep because we're so exhausted that we'd be riding all day. We rode about 12, 14 hours a day on our bikes to try to get across the country before the summer ended. And I'll never forget waking up the next morning and seeing this tent that we're sleeping in the middle of what was essentially the road for the entrance of this campground, and our stuff just scattered everywhere, like clothes everywhere, bikes everywhere, stuff just still wet from the night before. And that was a learning experience. So the lesson to be taken away is, if you are going to break the rules, weigh out the consequences of breaking the rules before you make that decision. And if you're ever in the desert and you see a piece of grass that's really lush and green, it's probably because it's being watered at night. Watch out for the sprinklers.